Hi, it's Susan. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to look at this star quilt. This is a gift that we personalized up in several important ways. It's all custom quilted, and this is a lot more custom than it might appear to be at first glance. So we'll get into that as we go along. Mostly it's a lot of lines. The client showed up with a small stack of logos and state flags and things to really personalize this quilt for the recipients. It's going to a married couple, and so she's combined motifs from both of their backgrounds. So there was a photo of the quilt at the very beginning, and here you can see I've done some stabilizing already, stitching in the ditch between the blocks and borders. And so here, most of the quilt is the stars and these rectangular pieces in between. So, and it's pretty contemporary looking. It's not exactly a modern quilt in the strictest sense of the word, but it looks pretty contemporary. So, not using a ton of traditional quilting, but the lines are really going to do it for this quilt. So so I stitched in the ditch horizontally between the blocks, but once I'm in the rows, that's where I'm doing some ditch quilting in the stars, and while I'm there, quilting some straight lines in the background spaces, and then continuous curve inside the star points. Working in some fullness here. This is quilted in all one color thread. Not a white, but kind of, somewhere in between an off-white and a cream. That's going to blend really well, and it's going to make the quilting leap out of the quilt. Using a slightly contrasting color is an old hand quilting trick, and that's for when you want the quilting to show up and not just disappear completely. And the lines are always going to show up, so they're going to look really prominent. It's interesting what they're going to do to the stars. You can see a little bit there on the block on the lower left. It kind of bevels them up a little bit. So you quilt with a ruler, but still kind of freehand, to the middle, and then echo that. This was a pretty time-consuming quilt, much more so than I expected it to be. Just because every inch of it was kind of painstaking. It wasn't complex, but there were a lot of things to work out. And, there's just a lot of stars in here, so it took some time to get around each one. The thread is Omni by Superior. It's a polyester thread, good and strong. It doesn't break too bad. I was even able to quilt back and forth. Usually if a thread is going to break, it's going to happen when you're quilting a horizontal line right to left, and that really worked out well on this quilt. The batting is just one layer of Hobbs 80-20, 80 cotton, 20 polyester. This is a throw. It's wider than it is tall. So that's a really good choice of bat for a quilt like this. As I've discussed in many videos previously, there is an order of things, and the quilting path from block to block, there's just a whole lot of different ways you could quilt this quilt and get the same thing done. And I think I did quilt it a little bit differently every time. I started to put in the straight lines and then go back and do the continuous curve, but not always. And it doesn't really matter, just whatever is working at the time will be great. And I tried to get it as usual, so I could quilt in one continuous line without having too many stops and start, going from that horizontal sort of sashing piece into the star and then onto the next one. That mostly worked if I didn't make mistakes and if the bobbin thread held out. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. See how fast you can do it if you can figure out a quilting path that's the most continuous you can get. And of course, that was a lot easier on this quilt using one color thread. So you see here, I've worked in the continuous curve along with the straight lines. And during this long process, I was thinking, what am I going to do in those empty white squares? And I had thought I would do something really different and unique and special and wonderful. And I kept looking online for design inspiration, and I just wasn't finding anything that I thought was really great that wasn't all the work in the world. And seeing how long this was taking, I scaled back my plans for that dramatically, because this was a quilt that wasn't supposed to take all year to do. I got out an extra long ruler for this patch with lines on it. That helps straighten up those lines and keep them even. So I didn't do any math here. I'm just eyeballing it. So instead of just one line, I'm doing pairs of lines. And that's a little tricky to get the spacing to work out, so you don't end up with really different spaces in between. But for the most part, I lucked out there. Here I've got my hem gauge just as a general guide. I ripped out a few lines that just went awry. Even with a ruler base, I find it a little tricky to hold that big long ruler perfectly straight the whole time. That's one of the challenges of ruler work. I've bought little grips to put on the bottom of the ruler, and sometimes those really help, and other times they really get in the way. Here, I think they really would have helped a whole lot to keep it steady. I don't completely advocate going back and forth like this on some lines that long. As I mentioned before, thread breakage is a problem, and that's going to depend on your machine. Will your machine cooperate, or will the thread break when you're going right to left? And also the presser foot, this one, like any other sewing machine, I'm not saying it will, but it can push your fabric, and you'll end up with fullness that is obviously pushed this way and then that. This quilt cooperated a lot, and that wasn't a big problem here. Okay, so by the time I got all of that done, then I was ready to go back and work on those white squares. Had I known what I was going to be doing At the beginning, I would have quilted those alongside all the star blocks, but I didn't. So this is a stop and a start. But I am glad I waited, because what if I had chosen some really ambitious design that was, a lot of backfills and stuff? That would have been unwise on this quilt. So really, all I'm doing here is replicating what happened in the stars. Cross-hatching the white square sort of mimics what's happening in the piecing, and then from there on, it's just filling in with what I did before on the other backgrounds, on those triangular pieces. This is when you can sit back and enjoy the process and have it speed right along, when you're not having to think about what am I going to do next, because you already know. And then I could free up the brain power to figure how I was going to handle the border, because that's when the real fun begins. The borders are where it gets filled up with a whole lot of motifs based on universities the recipients went to, and the states they have lived in and are living in. So in between doing this work, I was going to size these designs that she brought me. And then, once I got them to be the right size, then I made simplified line drawings of them and figured out how I was going to get them onto the quilt. So that took some doing. But that's part of the fun of machine quilting, of custom quilting, rather. Nobody else is going to have a quilt like this. And that makes for an extra special gift. One of the things I really like about this quilting scheme is the contrast. The short lines that turn different directions, and then the long horizontal lines in between and underneath the blocks. I think that's really good. And it's pretty simple. It looks, pretty complex, but it's not that big of a deal. Okay, and then for the center of each star, I found a star shape in the design library of my computerized machine and computerized a perfect star in each one of those centers. So this is the machine doing it, not me. And that part went pretty fast, even setting up each individual star. So that's gorgeous. Okay, so she wanted palmetto trees, and I found this design in a book by Laura Lee Fritz, who can freehand this kind of thing. So I put those on freezer paper and sewed them onto the quilt, and then filled in with some background quilting. This design is supposed to look like the flag. And then this is a logo from a university, and so you can see the original artwork and then the line drawing I made, and then how that stitched design looks in there. This oak leaf is another university symbol. This is a logo for a university. I did all kinds of lettering. I put NC for North Carolina and a star, and then the word Texas. So that came out pretty well. Here's a look at the back of the quilt. Pretty. Those logos went in the border because that's where there was the most room for them to go. And that's it. We ended up with a beautiful quilt. I hope these recipients are really going to love. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.